From the world headquarters of Fox News, it's The Kelly File with Megyn Kelly.
Well, brand new polls that must be disappointing to the White House. Less than 24 hours before the president delivers his fifth State of the Union address. Tonight, an overwhelming majority of Americans say they do not have confidence in President Obama's ability to make the right decisions for this country. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry just filed this report.
Good evening, Megyn. The president's report card from last year's State of the Union is not very strong. If you think about it, he called for immigration reform, a grand bargain budget deal, gun control, a hike in the minimum wage. He basically got none of it, and he goes into this year's State of the Union with an even weaker hand, in large part because of the missteps on health care reform. Look at how it has eaten into his credibility. A new ABC News Washington Post poll out today says only 37% of the public trust the president a great deal or a good amount to make the right decisions. 63% say they trust him some or none. That may explain why the president's aides are signaling to me tonight there's going to be more confrontation than compromise in tomorrow night's speech. That basically the president will say he's willing to work with Republicans on immigration reform and other matters if they want to work with him on a bipartisan basis, but he'll warn them he's willing to move forward on a unilateral basis with executive actions if they don't work with him. Interesting, the White House justifies this by saying the Republicans have largely blocked the president's agenda. He's going to have to go his own way, though I pressed Jay Carney today on why the president is not moving forward on an executive basis on other issues like Keystone, where basically Republicans say you could create jobs right now.
What the president is doing is what his predecessors did, predecessors of both parties, which is allowing the State Department to oversee a process where this pipeline is evaluated.
GOP leaders say the State Department has been studying the pipeline for years now, and they believe the reason why the president is getting ready for more executive action is that he knows he's getting closer and closer to being a lame duck, and the clock is ticking. Megyn?
Ed, thank you. So if Congress will not approve something, and Americans have lost confidence in the president's decisions, exactly who is he acting for when he acts on his own? And is he crossing a legal line here? Let's start with Judge Andrew Napolitano, Fox News senior judicial analyst. Judge, who does he act for?
Well, he probably will act for his friends. He probably will act for his base, for his supporters. Let's say members of labor unions whose pay he might be able to affect if they work for corporations that are doing business with the federal government. Now, he can't on his own change the minimum wage, but he could, if he wanted to, change the minimum wage that the federal government pays to contractors who work for the federal government.
And the White House has been saying all along he may do that, and that may be something we hear tomorrow.
And the federal government is the biggest spender in the land, so that would have a profound effect on the people that he believes supported him, many of whom no longer do.
Okay, let me ask you this. They say that this has been the consistent practice of all modern presidents. President Obama, President George W. Bush are about tied when it comes to the number of executive orders. First 5 years in office, Bush 165, Obama 167. That they've issued.
Well, you know, there are executive orders and there are executive orders. An executive order was intended to allow the President of the United States to get his arms around and control the machinery of the executive branch, of which he is the head, the military, the Justice Department, certain agencies that he can control.
To carry out his ability that the laws be faithfully executed.
That's the key, Megyn, and that line you just quoted is from his oath of office, which is in the Constitution, faithfully executed. That means he has to enforce the laws as they're written and as they were intended, whether he agrees with them or not. Now, here's where he can go over the line, as you asked. If he so changes the law by enforcing part and not enforcing part, that the meaning and the purpose and the intent of the law is different from what Congress enacted, then he's using his executive...
What specifically is he doing that on? Is he expected to do that on, or has he done it on?
He's been doing it on immigration. I mean, he basically rewrote the immigration law by saying, if you're here illegally, I'll tell you what hoops you can jump through and I won't deport you. Guess what? He made up the hoops. Congress didn't enact those hoops. He made up those hoops. The Environmental Protection Administration asked Congress to enact legislation which it refused to enact. He went ahead and had the Environmental Protection Administration enact that legislation as an administrative rule anyway.
But the Supreme Court said he'd have a lot of latitude when it came to regulating carbon.
Yes. And now I'm going to make the other argument. In fairness to President Obama, it is Congress that has given the president this president and his predecessors this kind of leeway. It is Congress that has allowed the president to get away with this. It is the Congress that can stop him, and it is the Congress that will probably roll over when he does it.
They can stop him by impeaching him. They can stop him by defunding his efforts.
That's the way they can do it.
Neither of which they've shown any appetite to do. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying those are the ways Congress can rein in a president.
Look, impeachment would be the nuclear reaction, so to speak.
Right.
But they could defund almost anything the president wants.
If they can get both bodies on board and then get him to sign it.
He can veto the defunding, and then they have to override the veto. So it's not an easy thing for them to do.
Clearly, because they tried many times in the House on Obamacare and they failed. Judge, good to see you.
Pleasure.
Also with us now on this issue, Robert Zimmerman. He's a Democratic consultant, a member of New York State's Democratic National Committee, and co-founder of Zimmerman et al.'s on Public Relations. Robert, good to see you.
Good to be with you.
Let me start with this quote from candidate Obama back before he became president on what kind of president he would be.
But this is part of the whole theory of George Bush, that he can make laws as he's going along. I disagree with that. I taught the Constitution for 10 years. I believe in the Constitution, and I will obey the Constitution of the United States.
And promised that he would not do an end around Congress. Is that what he's planning on announcing tomorrow?
No, of course not. I mean, let's be very clear, and Judge Napolitano very fairly pointed out that what the president is doing and what his predecessors have done is certainly protected under the law. And in fact, if he oversteps, we have not just the Congress that can take action, but also the court system that can take action as well. In fact, what the president is stepping up and actually doing is getting action and producing results, because that's what's really at stake here for the country.
Okay.
This is not a legal seminar we're in. We're about governing.
But, right, taking action is good, but not necessarily good when you have to do it without the Congress. There's a reason we elect those people, and we send them to Capitol Hill to go be our elected representatives. And there's a reason the Constitution says the president has to work with them.
And in fact, Megan, the president will work with them. But when you have a situation where the Republicans and the Democrats in the Senate are working well together, they produce legislation focusing on the highway, focusing on the highway bill, the immigration bill, the legislation to end discrimination against the gay and lesbian community. And then you go to the House of Representatives, where the Tea Party caucus has actually broken the institution.
But those are our elected representatives. You may not like what they're doing, but they're there for a reason.
That's right. But when the House is busy holding hearings about extraterrestrial forces or voting to 50 times to try to repeal Obamacare, and they're not dealing with the jobs bill, and they're not dealing with immigration, then it's important for the president to take his case to the American people, and where he legally can step up on issues like climate change, ending discrimination.
Now that's the key. That's where he legally can. Because the question is, was the system set up to be this adversarial and sort of lead to gridlock? And many constitutional scholars say yes. Let me ask you about this.
Okay.
Jonathan Turley, who's a left-leaning lawyer, keeps a very interesting blog called it's JonathanTurley.org. And he says that, in my view, Obama has surpassed George W. Bush in the level of circumvention of Congress and the assertion of excessive presidential power. I don't think it's even a close question, he says.
Well, let's remember, George W. Bush did, in 8 years, 291 executive orders, and Ronald Reagan did about 381 or 384 executive orders. So the point simply is, as Judge Napolitano pointed out, let's look at what the executive orders are. And so far, President Obama has not just been within the law, he's not been overturned by the courts and not been overturned by the Congress. So, in fact, he's governing, he's getting results, and for the Republicans to truly be a part of government, they have to come together and not let one small caucus ultimately destroy their effectiveness.
Well, that's not one small caucus when you got 63% of the public who don't have confidence in the president's
and 80% of the public doesn't trust the Republican Congress in making decisions.
So they don't want any decision. I think they like the gridlock. I got to go.
Okay, good to be with you.
Good to see you. Hope we see you again.
Thanks.
And tomorrow night, remember, the Kelly File is on the air starting at 11 p.m. We're going to have our coffee late. And boy, do we have a special guest for you tomorrow evening. Don't miss it. Set your TiVo, your DVR, 11 p.m. tomorrow.